Yeah, try to drop the lights a little bit. You know, the wiring in this building is excellent, so.
We need new wiring.
I think that was,
There it is. Yep.
Can we do that?
You guys are awesome, so can you guys kind of pretend like we're in the moonlight or something? Does that work for you? Can you see somewhat okay? Oh. Hey, do we need those plugs in the little
They should be on there.
round plugs? Maybe they got lost or borrowed.
He'll put that on his list to take care of.
Yeah, put that on your list. All right, let's go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 8, please. Genesis chapter 8. We have a lot to cover before we have communion together. The ark, I'll tell you, it's quite an amazing event that took place. I don't know if you knew this, but there are over 270 accounts that anthropologists have discovered from various civilizations preserved today regarding a global deluge, a global flood, with a man and his family surviving. I know it's just coincidence, 270 coincidences. And they're all sort of a little bit different, but one account comes from the Assyrian discoveries by George Smith. He was an archaeologist in the 19th century. He discovered what they call the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature in the world, as he was excavating in Nineveh, of all places. In 1872, he found 12 tablets, and on the 11th tablet, one had a large part of the flood narrative. And this is what he said when he read it. I am the first man to read that after more than 2,000 years of oblivion. Then he put the tablet on the table and ran around the room like a maniac, taking off his clothes. He just flipped out. He goes, I can't believe this. I guess archaeologists can get weird. I don't know. I guess it blessed his socks off, But it's amazing because this is what the tablet says. It goes on to speak of a holy man who was a sage. He was devoted to a single deity, and that the earth was filled with violence and corruption because of the races of giants on the earth. So he built a boat, and after the flood sent out a raven and then a dove coming off the boat to build an altar to sacrifice to his God. Right out of the scripture, and yet written completely at another place at another time. And that was the account. That's one of 270 accounts. So the evidence in history is massive for this ark. It really truly is. This is what many people believe the ark is resting right now. They had a major heat wave over there in Turkey not too long ago, and that shape that you see, which oddly looks like a coffin as well as a boat there. They believe that the ark rests underneath all the silt and stuff underneath of the years of normally it's covered with snow. And so just an interesting thing to be thinking about. Mount Ararat, by the way, is in Armenia, Turkey. This is just a map to kind of show you where it's at. And they continue to study this whenever they can when the snow kind of comes off, which is very rare. But lately that's been happening. But here we see in this chapter, in chapter 8, we could say that this is the beginning of the end of the flood. And we're going to read from verses 6 through 19, and then we'll kind of comment on it because I think it's good to get the whole gist of things. So as you know, in the first 5 verses, we covered that, how God remembered Noah. He returns back to keep his promise that he made in chapter 6. And so the ark rests there on the same day as the resurrection, which is awesome. And so in verse 6 it says, "It came to pass at the end of 40 days," that is the additional 40 days, "that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven." Now, can you imagine what it must have been like to actually get that fresh air coming in for the first time in a long time? You know, he had some ventilation, don't get me wrong, but just to open that window. You know what it's like if you've been in a car with the windows closed and the dog's inside? Okay, so there you get the idea. It probably was pretty nice to open up that window. So he opens the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, a scavenger bird, which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. In other words, this raven never came back. And then he also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. And she returned into the ark to him, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Not part of the earth or some of the earth, the whole earth. So this is not a local flood here. This is a global flood being referred to. So this dove, their instinct is to go and find a nest, to begin to nest, to go look for branches. And so he sends out this raven, and then he sends out this dove. But the dove comes back. He puts out his hand and he takes her in and draws her into the ark to himself, and he waits a week. He waits a week. Now you have to understand that after this flood, remember, as the water sat on the earth, underneath things were formulating, and God was basically doing a work underneath the waters and shaping the mountains and the valleys and the things that you and I see today. Prior to that, there were some high hills and some mountain peaks, but not like there was when the fountains of the deep blew. And you guys all know that with earthquakes, there are different mountains that get pushed up and valleys that are made. Well, now that's beginning to happen as the water is going to begin to recede and has been receding. It's sort of draining into places where there are pockets of air within the earth and the deeper valleys. And so he waits another 7 days, and he sends the dove out from the ark. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth. It's really interesting, olive leaves, they grow in the water. So it makes sense that they're very resilient. If you've ever had a chance to be in Israel, it's a wonderful thing to go through the Garden of Gethsemane because of the old ancient olive trees that are there. But these things, man, they can handle a lot. And some of them, I believe there are some olive trees or olive branches that will continue to grow even after they've been chopped off the branch or off the bulk of the tree. The leaves still continue to grow. So it's kind of interesting that the dove would go for that because she wanted to start a nest, but it wasn't quite right. So he has it in her mouth, and no one knew now that the waters had receded. And so he waited yet another 7 days, and he sent out the dove, which did not return again to him anymore. She found her nest. And so now things are beginning to happen. It came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. And look, now, man, not just removing the window, but the covering. I mean, I'd be up there going, you know, but the whole topography, everything would have been probably pretty shocking to Noah because the hills were more rigid, the mountains were more rigid, there was wind, there was things, there was clouds in the sky. This was all different to him as he looks up and the waters were dried up from the earth. It probably looked very arid, very dreary, of course, like winter, you know, where there was just a lot of mud and silt everywhere, and maybe some trees that were just somewhat dead, just in their, you know, with their branches. But you guys have seen, you remember Mount St. Helens when it blew, and you saw the pictures of the devastation. They assumed it was going to be 20 years before it would start showing vegetation, but I think it was only like in 3 or 4 years it was, you know, green everywhere and growing. And so too, Noah could tell there was some green vegetation going on and there was some, you know, life beginning to take place. So then God spoke to Noah saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you, or come out. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you. Don't you know that must have been a happy day for Noah to let these guys out, to let the dog out, as it were. Birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Guys, go, man. Subdue. Go for it, man. You're on your own. So that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. So that's day 371. That is a long time to be in that ark, don't you think? You know, someone say, oh man, that 6-day cruise, man, that was brutal. Ain't seen nothing yet, you know. 371 days. Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth according to their families went out of the ark. So it was time to move on. So we read here that the ark finally settles on solid ground. And Noah opens the window and he sends out a raven. Why a raven? Well, a raven is an unclean bird. And a raven feeds on carrion, dead stuff, dead flesh, as it were. And so, naturally, why would it want to return? It was like the millennium for the raven. Think about it. He sees a big honking elephant. It's like, yeah, man, dinner for 6 weeks, you know. I mean, so the raven was totally happy, just feeding on all this dead flesh that's left and lying around that the marine life didn't scoop up and eat on the way in this last year. So the raven was pretty happy. But he was an unclean bird, which is interesting because then Noah sends a dove, which is a clean bird, and it went out, listen, into a judged world. It's interesting how the unclean bird was happy to be feeding upon the flesh, but the dove goes out into a judged world and cannot find rest or satisfaction and comes back to the ark because it's a clean bird. And I like this because the raven, guys, is a picture of the work of our flesh. And the dove is a picture of the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives. And I'm going to kind of show that to you. You see, the Bible teaches us that there are two natures that you and I have to deal with. Paul called them the old man, that's not your dad,